back in spaces.
Hey folks, welcome to Science on Tap.
And we got
oh my goodness. This is the Science on Tap first. Yeah, you need those little spoons. Pass it around. A front row dessert. Jeff, good luck. You're going to be distracted. All right, well, welcome to Science on Tap. We have, I think, a pretty spectacular event planned here. So I have to get something out of the way right off the bat here and apologize. Hillary couldn't make it to represent the Lakers. So we have 2 sick boys at home, and oddly enough, no babysitter wanted to deal with sick children. So I'm here representing us both, I guess, as a member and as someone from the bio station. So I assume we might have some fresh faces tonight, so I'll talk a little bit about Science on Tap. What we're trying to do here is essentially provide an avenue or a pathway for science to make its way to the community. And we're really hoping that we can present science and science that's going on in the Flathead Valley and beyond in a really approachable and laid-back manner. And it's an agreement or a cooperative between the Flathead Lake Biological Station and the Flathead Lakers, who both have, I think, a profound respect for the lake and the science that's going around around the system. So we really are hoping to create a nice, laid-back way to communicate science and to communicate what's being done right here. And I think tonight's talk is going to be a perfect example of what I mean. So I have to plug the Lakers for a moment. I won't hand the mic off to any board members or anything. I'll just go ahead and say, if you're not a Flathead Laker, my wife, who's home with sick children tonight, begs you to become a member. And it's my job to bring home 3 new memberships tonight. So please help me, I think is what I'll say. I'm in big trouble anyway. And it's tough work sitting up here and drinking beer while she's at home dealing with sick kids. So I plead and I can keep going about how tough this is, or you can just sign up for the Flathead Lakers. Oh, come on now. Would you like me to expand, sir, with the trumpet? Because you're giving me that sound effect. I can keep going for sure. Please, if you Flathead Lake members and board members, please raise your hand tonight. Wonderful, so good representation. If you're not a Flathead Laker, which I saw many folks here not raise their hands, you should speak to some, yeah, should I do it the opposite way? If you're not, let me shame you. I think that what I'm trying to say is if you just saw someone raise their hand and you're not a member, please talk to them about what the Lakers do for us around Flathead Lake. If you have any wondering what's going on at the biological station, please talk to me. I see another biological station here, but I think we're in short order tonight. Tom Bansak's in the other room, so we do have representation here if you're interested in what's going on at the station science-wise. It's a really happening place, and we'd love to talk about what's going on there. So that's enough about that. The key thing about Science on Tap, if you haven't picked it up, is that it's a laid-back atmosphere. So if you need a beer while the presentation's going on, the waitress isn't here right now. She's usually right on point. As soon as I say that, she sticks her head through the door. Flag her down, waving and giving her the old, she's getting a beer. Perfect. So that's what she should be doing. Every beer that's purchased tonight, we get $1 of the proceeds to split between our 2 organizations, and it helps pay for the Science on Tap website and buy, show some appreciation to the speakers by buying them dinner and a few things like that. No beers of mine are bought with that money, I promise. But it's the idea is that it's laid back and it's a way for you to learn what's going on. So I think that's enough about that. We have a pretty exciting presenter or speaker tonight. I think this is maybe when Hillary and I started talking about developing this idea, this was about central, right down the pipe to what we were thinking. So tonight we have the superintendent of Glacier National Park to talk about the art and science of managing national parks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Mount.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here. What a great venue it is, and I
I don't get to Big Fork enough, and you know, I know there's so many in this room that have incredible connections to Glacier National Park. You know, there's a big sucking sound up there as the park, just because it's the popularity, the busyness, and the issues. So it's great to sort of break away from that gravitational pull and join you here for a great event like this. I think the idea of Science on Tap is terrific. It's you know, great way to sort of engage the community on a lot of the pertinent things that are going on. So let me start by just saying that you know, I am a ologist of sorts. I'm a geologist, and I think sometimes. Oh, I got to turn it on. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, you know, Glacier is a fantastic place to be. It's certainly, you know, one of the high points of my career working for the National Park Service. I have had quite an interesting experience working for the National Park Service in a variety of places. Most of my career has been in Alaska, so I got to spend almost 23 years of my career working many units throughout Alaska, most recently in the south central portion of Alaska at a place called Kenai Fjords National Park. And it was kind of fun today because one of our district rangers from the many glacier areas just now getting ready to make his move to Kenai Fjords to be the chief ranger there. So I was very excited for him, Rob Wissinger. But you know, over that time we've had exciting opportunities, lived in some pretty incredible places. Some of the most memorable for me is up in Gates of the Arctic. So my wife and I, Amy, who's over here in this corner here, we early in our relationship we ventured up north of the Arctic Circle and lived almost 6 years north of the Arctic Circle. A couple years of those in this little Eskimo village of Aniktuvik Pass, which is right on the Continental Divide between the interior of Alaska and the Arctic slope. And what an experience there. It was our opportunity to sort of engage with native communities there, which, you know, if you don't know about Alaska, Alaska is kind of set up on a different model for engaging with native peoples than what you find in the lower 48. And actually, I find that's very helpful for my position now here at Glacier, because of sort of bringing that slightly different way of thinking about native peoples and their relationship to the landscape. Had the opportunity to be a short stint as a superintendent of Denali National Park, which is probably another one of those iconic units of the National Park Service. Terrific experience. So, as I mentioned, I'm a geologist. I first came to Montana in 1979, working on a thesis. I was working for the U.S. Geological Survey, and I was working in the Flint Creek Range out of Deer Lodge, or actually out of Gold Creek there, the small community north of Deer Lodge, and did a thesis project up there. So, but what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit less about sort of the science that you might have heard from some other scientists in this program, and talk a little bit more about, as a park manager, how we use some of that science and what we do with that. So, you know, a lot of, I'm trying to think if I guess I did miss. Well, Kenai Fjords National Park is a pretty interesting place, and this is, you know, this really struck me when I was there, just how dramatic change can be. Let's see here. Gotta make sure I'm pointing in the right direction. Step back a minute and just talk about, you know, as a superintendent at Glacier National Park, and one of the unique things about Glacier National Park is it's sort of large enough that I'm able to have a deputy superintendent. And people often ask, well, what's the relationship between a deputy superintendent and a superintendent? And part of that is sort of the way we make things work, in the sense of I rely on my deputy superintendent to take the primary role of making sure that our ship runs well, that it's smoothly running, that the machinery works well, that everything is running smoothly. But I kind of see my job as the superintendent to look at where the ship is headed and make sure it's headed in the right direction. And a lot of that has to do is working on the larger landscape around the park. And so I'll sort of come back to this theme a little bit later in the presentation about, what does it mean to sort of look and see, you don't think of national parks as entities that move through the geography, but there's some things to be aware of. And certainly, last year we celebrated the centennial of the National Park Service, and it was a proud opportunity to celebrate, all that's been achieved. But I think it's also an opportunity for us to look back and think about, what did my predecessors think about? What did they see as their challenges looking ahead? And how did they see how they were going to steer the ship? So I think I can honestly say that a lot of them, or many of them, would have never foreseen the changes that are impacting national parks today, and the things that we'll have to navigate as we move forward into the future. So, Kenai Fjords National Park, I was talking about change, and just how dramatic change is. Kenai Fjords National Park sits on the Gulf of Alaska, and in many respects, is a lot like what this landscape here would have been like 15,000 years ago, when things were still under ice. And of course, Kenai Fjords are known for its fjords that empty out into the Gulf of Alaska. But, like Glacier, there's been a long history of repeat photography that shows some of the dramatic change in the glaciers over time. So, has some similarities to what we have here at Glacier. But, it's that long-term repeat photography. In some cases here at Kenai Fjords, glaciers have receded over 15 miles from those photographs that were originally taken in the early 1900s. But that change, what we saw just in the 7 years we lived there, was pretty dramatic in its own right. And this is a couple of photos I like to show, because here's a photo of a young girl. Her parents took it of her in 1999. And this girl, I think, about 10 years later, came back to work for the National Park Service as an interpreter. And so, and so we, set this up. She had that photo that her parents took of herself, and now she did, sort of did that repeat photography. And even in her own right, the change that takes place in that landscape is quite dramatic. And so there's a lot of stories there. And oftentimes when I talk about climate change, because of my long history in climate in Alaska, you'd be hard-pressed to convince me that climate change isn't happening, because I feel like climate change in Alaska is really in your face. Let's talk about science, the way sort of my brain works in terms of how I sort of think about the sciences or things that are going on. So the types of science and research and monitoring that takes place in Glacier National Park. So, the physical science, and I'm sure, I know many of you have been to a number of these Science on Tap, so I'm assuming Dan Fakery's been here. Where has it been? Not yet? Oh my gosh. Lightning strikes. Dan always precedes me almost everywhere I go. So, Dan's, does Dan Fakery and his staff, Lisa McKeon, and others at USGS at the park, they do a lot of physical science work. Of course, the glacier work at Glacier is well known, has a very strong reputation, well documented. Biological sciences, and I'm pretty sure that you've heard about this with regards to our fisheries, with regards to grizzly bears and grizzly bear diets. That those are needless to say vitally important. Glacier is known. It's probably one of the most intact ecosystems in the lower 48 with respect to its wildlife. Something that's becoming more and more important, especially as Glacier gets more and more popular, is our understanding of social science. What are our visitors coming to see? What are their expectations? Because we are being impacted by high levels of visitation, there's a lot of emphasis placed on social science, and we work with the University of Montana quite a bit on that. And the cultural sciences, the cultural sciences, such projects as ice patch archaeology, climate change related, in that so many of these large ice fields are starting to melt, and along their edges they tend to reveal archaeological finds or even biological finds to sort of document change over time as well. So, and then, you know, we've had an incredible ethnographic study recently completed, and that's Sally Thompson's work on the park before, well, the land before the park. I've actually forgotten the title. Has Sally been here yet? You should get here. She is terrific. So, lighten you up. Lighten you up. No, but there is an incredible wealth of knowledge here, incredible wealth of science that, you know, when we think about where we are headed with the park into the future, with a lot of change coming our way, you know, the data that comes out of this, the analysis that comes out of this is all very, very important. You know, needless to say, last year we saw a lot of people. You know, in fact, I'd even be tempted to say, you know, at times too many people. But the popularity of the park was very, very strong. Absolutely record numbers. This was an interesting event. We call it an Insta-Meet, which I'd never been to one before. I didn't know what to expect, and it was amazing. 350 people that just wanted to be there, just wanted to share stories, and just wanted to celebrate. You know, and it was a great experience. Steve Daines is there in the bottom right corner there. He joined us for that. He's quite interested in how technology and high tech is, you know, social media. So I thought that was pretty interesting to have him there. But, you know, with those high numbers, with that popularity that, you know, perhaps was spurred or driven by social media, we did see a lot of visitors in the park. And a lot of, you know, this was not, I'm sure many of you here went through some of this with some of the lines we had waiting for the shuttles. You know, a lot of the high visitation issues we had, as expected, were concentrated along the Going to the Sun Road corridor. But I think what we saw last year is a lot of this also peaked at a lot of areas beyond the Going to the Sun corridor. Places like the North Fork, certainly Two Medicine and many, of course, but many of our outlying areas really got high levels of visitation. And that's something that, you know, I can honestly say, I think we saw levels of visitation in places in our park that we're not sure we want to repeat that. You know, the crush of humanity, the gridlock that it caused. You know, in some cases, staff reported to me that if we'd had an emergency, we wouldn't have been able to get an emergency vehicle in there. So we need to be a little more proactive on monitoring that. And as we see that, you know, I'm telling the staff, you know, you need to be prepared to swing the gate, because there are times when there are just too many people in an area. And if we need to swing the gate for a while because of an acute situation, it's okay, you know, to just hold people up, have one person come in, one person come out. We experienced this in 2015 when we had the fire on the Going to the Sun Road, and we had to close that, and we had to control visitation there. And it was very interesting because I'm not sure the staff understood, but many of our visitors, they were okay with having to wait their turn to get up to Logan Pass. It wasn't the end of the world. This is a trip of a lifetime. They come from places where waiting for things isn't abnormal to them. And you know, people were willing to wait 2 or 3 hours for their turn to go up to Logan Pass. Now, I'm not sure I've got that kind of patience, and I'm not sure many of you in this room have that level of patience. But you know, we have to think about you know, where our visitors are coming from and what some of their expectations are and how they might be different than ours. So I think that's what social science is trying to tell us. In fact, one of the social scientists related to me. So one of the things that came up in 2016 that I always like to talk about is, usually in my office, I see visitor comment letters come in. And in my mind, they usually run about 4 or 5 to 1 in terms of positive comments to negative comments. But last year, what I saw was those comments were coming in at 7 or 8 to 1. In a year where we had a 25% increase in visitation. Not what I would have figured out. But the social scientists they're starting to think, well, you know, I think because last year was the centennial, people were coming to the park not necessarily for your normal park visit. They were coming here to be part of the celebration. They wanted to be part of the event, part of the year. So they had different expectations than perhaps what we had sort of thought they might. So interesting to think about. So we'll see what 2017 brings. You know, so you know, very busy in the park. This is common, but the amount of this that we saw was not common. And you know, in many cases, clearly we've exceeded our design when you get cars parked at the angled repose. And I say angled repose because there were situations where once the driver got out of the car just continued to roll over. So, and we didn't have to call tow trucks. So, but you know, this is, you know, people were pushing the limits and going places. Our landscape architect, Jack Gordon, who's been in the park for easily 2.5 decades, said, I cannot believe what I'm seeing, you know, and you know, clearly they had never thought that people would push themselves to these limits. So, indicators. This table isn't quite right because our June visitation numbers are actually much, for 2016, weren't just 4% up over the previous year. It's actually 24% over the previous year. So, and overall, our visitation went up almost 25% for 2016. So, you know, we do a lot of number crunching. You can tell, you know, for some people, numbers are very important. So, you know, it's a way for us to sort of track what's going on. Not only did we see increases in our peak season, but we also saw big increases in our shoulder seasons. So if we look back at our May visitation for the last 2 years, it's over 50%. If we look at just November this year, which if you remember was very unusual for how dry and warm it was, our visitation just this last November was 50% over the previous November. And again, you know, I think that's just simply most of us taking advantage of the good weather or that opportunity to access things. So, what are some of the reasons, you know, as I brought up the centennial, you know, why did so many people come in 2016? Why did we get our big pulse? A number of reasons, centennial being one. I think the lack of fires was another. You know, 2015 we had a lot of fire, and that really impacted our visitation. Yellowstone didn't have fires in 2015. They saw a 20% increase. 2016, Yellowstone only saw a 4% increase because they had fires, you know, at the south entrance in Yellowstone. So, you know, gas prices, some other ideas, you know, the interest in domestic visits, exchange rates, Chinese tourism. That's an interesting one that I hear a lot from my counterparts at Yellowstone and Grand Teton. They've seen significant increases in mainland Chinese visitors coming in bus tours. And that's not something we've seen. That's, you know, we're not a bus tour friendly park. And so I am, however, hearing that we are seeing Chinese visitors starting to come in more from Calgary, mainly on the east side, many Glacier. You know, I'm hearing from some of our staff who work the entrances, campgrounds. Diane, you probably know that, yeah, you know, and oftentimes when those visitors show up, they present you with their passport, so I guess you know right away where they're from. So, but yeah, so you know, things will be changing over time. But 2017, you know, what to expect in 2017? We kind of knew going into 2016, there was a good chance we could see 20% increase in visitation. There were some early indicators coming from some of our vendors who do bookings that, you know, we were headed in that direction. This year they're saying they're not seeing much of an increase over last year's visitation. So we'll see, you know, it's sort of what goes with that. But one of the things we know that's happening is that in Canada, Parks Canada, all the units of Parks Canada have no admission fees because of Canada celebrating its 150th. They're encouraging visitation to their parks. I've met with a group of 9 superintendents from Canada who are all asking, what do you guys do when you have high visitation, because what should we be thinking about? So we are sort of trading notes across the border, but yeah, if they're expecting high numbers, I'm sure we'll see a little bit of bounce of that. Again, probably mostly on the east side. So while we talk about high visitation and the visitors that come, I think it's worth noting the fact that it's been a compelling place for the last 100 years as a national park, but certainly there's a lot to be said for the culture that was here on this landscape long before the national park was established. And as we've thought about that, I've thought about it a lot, about sort of what does that look like? Because 100 years ago, so many of the visitors that would come to Glacier, they'd get off the train in East Glacier, and they'd get off, and there they would see the mountains, and there they would see the Blackfeet. And I've spoken to many of the Blackfeet, or several about Blackfeet over in Browning, who remember as small children living in the teepees behind the East Glacier Lodge. And sort of what that meant to them as they look back on their life and what's different now. And so one of the things that we did this year, which I thought was really exciting, was to ask the Blackfeet to come up and do a blessing at Logan Pass when the road opened. We don't know, we're not going to be able to emulate what the Great Northern Railway did 100 years ago. But I think there's some things we can be doing to help, reconnect the Blackfeet to that landscape that used to be part of their homeland. And so I think they were very appreciative of this opportunity. We hope it becomes a new tradition. Some of them who attended this event relayed the fact that the last time they were there to do a blessing or have this kind of opportunity was when Going to the Sun Road was first opened in 1932. So it was pretty moving for some of them. And it's led me to sort of get very excited about some of the other initiatives we have, and one of them is sort of the idea of restoring bison to the east side of the park, and working with the Blackfeet across a landscape that not just that includes the northeast corner of the Blackfeet Reservation, northeast corner of Glacier National Park, northwest corner of the reservation, Waterton National Park, and the flood reserve that's just outside of Waterton, as well as some of the other lands outside of Waterton National Park. So this INI initiative, which is the idea to bring back bison to a landscape they formerly lived in, and the bison that we're actually reintroducing are bison that were captured from this area in 1872, taken over here to the west side. They were down in, they were part of the Pablo Allen herd down on the reservation down here, and then they were moved up to Canada. So these are descendants of the same bison that were taken out of this landscape well over 100 years ago. And so this is a partnership project that we're working on. It's a transboundary conservation between agencies and tribes and First Nations. So it's a very exciting project. And I like to think about it, it's just not about the conservation aspect of this project that's compelling. It's also compelling from the cultural perspective of what this will mean, because, of course, when the 48th parallel was established as the international boundary, that sort of bisected the Blackfoot culture with that international boundary, and then, quite honestly, how Canada and the U.S. both deal with Native peoples are different. And so there's a real opportunity here through a project like this to help sort of bring those ties back across an international boundary. So very exciting from a cultural perspective. Also has a lot of meaning for them in terms of their health, their lifestyle, so spiritual healing. There's just a lot of elements to that. It also has tremendous benefits, I think, when you think of their community, and the idea of a nature-based community, what that might look like. And they're doing some land use planning to think about, well, if we're going to have these bison and they are going to be next to Glacier National Park, maybe we should be managing some of our lands more like a national park. So that has actually come up in conversation. So it's very exciting stuff. So another issue that, of course, I think you might have heard about before at one of these is these quagga and zebra mussels shown here in the lower right and left-hand corner that are new on our landscape. That little red triangle up there in Montana, that's the Tiber Reservoir, Canyon Ferry, representative of that. And so, as we move forward, how do we work to ensure that our landscapes don't get further infected or slow that spread of these? And certainly there's, where quagga and zebra have shown up elsewhere, that sometimes, when they first appear, their establishment isn't sort of as vigorous and permanent and long-standing. So there are opportunities if we take a very strong stand, very protective methodologies to keep them out, that we have an opportunity to really slow the spread and even maybe hold them off. So, and of course, it includes working with partners. And the biological station is going to be an important partner with that. But as we look at the activities associated with detecting them and monitoring them, it'll be very important. So probably next week, I'm not ready to tell you yet, but we closed the waters in Glacier National Park last fall to all boating until we could get a feel, an understanding of what things could look like. And we're going to talk about next week how we might start lifting that closure with the oncoming of the summer, but doing it in a way that has a high level of integrity with respect to keeping mussels from coming in. So more to come on that. And to work with our partners, so working closely with Parks Canada, working with the Blackfeet Tribe, working with the state of Montana, the Flathead Basin Commission, how do we create this system to reduce the spread of quagga and zebra mussels, but also especially around the Flathead Basin, especially around the Columbia River drainages. So how do we draw that? How do we draw that line in the sand, as it were, to protect the Columbia River Basin as we move forward? So big effort, sort of whole new opportunities for new science and new research as we try to manage that issue. So I'm going to sort of switch now. So I talk a little bit about some of the science that we're doing, in response to specific issues, but I also like to talk a little bit about how we use some of the science even beyond sort of the immediate issues that are in our face today. And this is the art part that I'm in my talk here, and it comes from, my inspiration for calling it art comes from this book called The Art of the Long View. And it's written by an economist who worked for Shell Oil for a number of years, and who developed this process called scenario planning, thinking scenarically about the future. When you think about the future with so much uncertainty, how do you do that and not fall into the trap of trying to predict what the future will be? And so, I've been involved with scenario planning for well over 10 years now, and it's taking a lot of those things that as we look into the future with a lot of uncertainty, how do we sort of think about what the future could look like, again, without sort of predicting where the future will go? Because oftentimes when we predict what's going to happen, it turns out otherwise. And so the whole idea of thinking scenarically is thinking across a whole broad range of possible, plausible futures. And so in 2010, I was involved with doing some scenario planning for Glacier National Park. I was still up in Alaska at the time, but we did some scenario planning looking at scenarios for what climate might be like in and around Glacier National Park in the Crown of the Continent ecosystem. And we came up with some scenarios that were sort of based on, what we think things like the temperature change over time. We looked at rain on snow events, the frequency of those. We looked at a number of things that we thought could be drivers of change. And so through that process, the scenario planning process, we came up with these 3 scenarios of what climate scenarios for Glacier National Park. And And I'm not going to spend a lot of time other than say these are really looking out 50 to 100 years into the future. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of variability built into these scenarios. But you put these scenarios out there so that you can think about a range of what the possible futures would like. So when you make decisions, you're not sort of betting the farm on one outcome. You're thinking about your decisions across a whole range of outcomes given the uncertainties that come with them. And I'd just like to point out a study that just came out in 2016 from the A.T. Kearney, big management consulting firm out of Chicago. They did this study called America 250 and was looking at a 10-year time frame that in 10 years, what could America look like with regards to society? And they looked at a lot of data about the country, the sociological, economic, global issues, technological issues, especially interesting the demographic issues and the range of issues across the country. And so they identified what they call what they think are the three primary drivers for what the future will look like 10 years from now with regards to the United States. And they said millennial preferences, as the millennial generation becomes the dominant generation in our population, how they weigh in on some of these issues of the day is going to be very, very important. And, I think there's been a lot of conversation about that following our most recent election. Technological disruption, the rate of change in technology is happening so quickly, it's really hard to keep up, and it's impossible to predict. And so, what is that rate of change going to be like, and how do we work through those changes is going to be incredibly important, as well as the global landscape. And we've seen there's been a lot of evolution and sort of that global landscape just very, very recently, but that will continue to evolve, of course. But they see these three things as some of the huge drivers that's going to affect what they see as the four possible futures for the United States. And they came up with their matrix, which is similar to what I've used before in doing scenario planning, about what the future in the United States will look like 10 years from now. And they sort of took lines out of the Star-Spangled Banner to describe what those futures might look like. So gallantly streaming, where we have high economic performance, and we also have high national alignment. We're really going somewhere, and we're all in line, which I don't think you could say we are at right now, versus Twilight's last gleaming, given a future where there's less alignment and not a lot of ability to make dramatic change going into the future. So anyway, 4 scenarios. I think it's very, very interesting. What I like about scenarios as a park manager is because I like to think that I'm in the forever business. National parks are about the forever business. So we need to always look that much further ahead. We can't let, near-term, political things, sort of, we have to deal with them, we have to mitigate for them, but we have to be able to sort of think further on what's going to be important as we look into the future. So, I think it's, all these scenarios, they require a lot of input from data, a lot of input from science, what climatologists tell us, what economists tell us, as we put these together. So if you want more information about this one, what I think is very interesting is I learned about this through one of the board members of the Glacier National Park Conservancy, who, his study of these scenarios is that under the 4 scenarios presented, there's no way the budget of Glacier National Park is going to go up very much at all. In all of these, the economies, and the interest rate on our debt is just going to make that impossible. But as an organization, the Glacier National Park Conservancy is thinking, where do they need to be 10 years from now? As a $2 million a year philanthropic organization, that's not going to cut it in their mind. And so they're talking about how do they position themselves as a 10 million a year organization, because that's what's going to be needed in their minds to keep the quality and the experiences at Glacier National Park going. So that's my hat's off to some of those board members who are that sort of forward thinking, because I was really impressed by that. So, being forward thinking, looking forward to the next 100 years, what does that mean? I spoke about the importance of that millennial generation and that we reach out to that millennials and beyond them to ensure that we've got those advocates for parks into the future. Taking care of the resources that we have, and this summer we'll be celebrating the completion of a 7-phase rehabilitation of the Mini Glacier Hotel over a course of 15 years, and I think close to $40 million of federal investment and probably $2 or $3 million of private investment into that. So that would be a great achievement to have that. And then also just thinking about sort of that, I don't know if we'll see it tonight, but the dark skies, is one of the things that we've learned recently is just how valuable dark skies are to many of our visitors. And I think there's studies that have come out that say over 30% of the world can no longer see the Milky Way because of light pollution. And you're hearing more studies saying that people who have trouble sleeping, if you need to reset your clock, you need to go winter camping, because when you're out there in nature, that's what resets your clock. But just also, the story of the skies, this is tremendously important to Blackfeet culture as well as all Native cultures in telling their creation stories. And certainly we have our own Western stories that are related to the sky. So our night sky programs are the most popular programs we do in the park. We've had over 700 people at Logan Pass. Anybody there last summer?
Couldn't get tickets.
So couldn't get tickets. Yeah. So so the interest in it is very, very high. So I think it's about another month we'll be announcing that the Waterton Glacier as being one of the world's first international dark sky park. It's a new designation that the International Dark Sky Association, so I probably let the cat out of the bag, but that's okay. You guys are keeping secret. We're very excited about, because I think it builds on that history and tradition that Glacier has as the world's first international peace park. How we continue to build on that, doing more and more across the border, and how we continue to be a model for other conservation areas around the world. So I know my talk was a lot longer than I intended, so, but I just want to thank everybody for being here this evening. A little bit of sort of the art and science of what we look at Glacier National Park, and with that I'd be happy to take any questions.
That was awesome. I think this is the only thing I can say. That was really great. It was eye-opening, and that's exactly what we had in mind. Thank you very much. I think the best way is I'll just hand the mic back to you, and if you want to pass the mic around, that's fine. If you want to repeat the questions, that goes a little smoother, you'll see. Depends on how long the question is, usually. But let's have another round of applause. That was incredible. I'd like to take 1 second and thank Jeff for the hard work that he does. I think that we all in this room are incredibly enamored and beyond respectful of what it is you preserve on an everyday basis and what it is to be able to go up to Glacier for an afternoon. And I mean, it's an incredible privilege. It really is. So I'd like to well done. Cheers. I think that talk was exemplary of what Science on Tap is all about, and I hope that everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really incredible. So I'll hand the mic back. I think that repeating the question is the way to go this evening. I saw a lot of hands shoot up right away, so it looks like a rambunctious crowd. Good luck.
No, you choose the questions. Logan is such a great venue, such a popular place. What are the thoughts in terms of dealing with the flow of traffic and maybe preventing fist fights in the parking lot?
So the question is, because I know we've got an audience over there in the barrel room, so I'll repeat the question is what about Logan Pass, which is so busy, fills up early, once it's full, tensions tend to flare. We try to manage the best we can with those things, but what can we do about that? And I think, 2015 was a interesting data point for us in terms of learning about something, because that was the first time where I think in the park, and Diane, maybe you might chime in on this a little bit, was my impression from the staff, that was the first time we really saw drought conditions in the park. I mean, people who had been up at Sperry Chalet for years, running the water system, had never seen those kinds of conditions before. And so, very dramatic for us. We came very close to running out of water at Logan Pass. Again, something that had never, staff who had been there for decades had never seen before. So, I think that sort of tipped us off to the idea, and we get asked a lot, can you build a bigger parking lot? Can you shoehorn more people in there? And, you can build the infrastructure, but, you need things like water to sustain it. And, I think what we learned is that water is a limiting factor there. And so I think what it comes down to is really how do we manage, we're at capacity there, and how do we manage that for opportunity and experience, and recognize that should we sort of begin some strategies to limit how long you can park there, because there's some people who literally only want to be there just to go to the bathroom, and that's another thing we started to realize is that there's not a lot of bathrooms between the Loop and Logan Pass, and some people just want to pull in, go to the bathroom and move on. Others just want to stop, take a picture, move on. Others want to go Hidden Lake. Others want to hike the Highline. So, how do we sort of, and that's what the University of Montana, with a lot of social science they're doing, they can tell us hour by hour what that use is looking like. And so, Logan Pass is one of the key congestion points that we'll be addressing in our Going to the Sun Corridor Management Plan, which we'll be putting out to the public for review probably this summer. But I think it's not going to be about building a bigger facility there. It's going to be about managing use, managing expectations that go with that use, to the point of maybe even, potentially having reservations. Or if you don't have a reservation, you may just have to drive by and come back at a time when, you don't have reservations required because the use isn't very high. So I think, and that's, some of this is what we learned from other parks and what they're doing too. So hopefully that works.
I have two questions. First, your graphic of the scenarios for the park, could you explain the terms you had in there a little bit more? And second, could you talk a little bit about what latitude you do or have, or how you're hampered by political, financial, etc., making decisions about day-to-day use, protecting against invasive mussels, things like that, where you kind of hit a ceiling of being able to make those calls?
Okay, two questions there. One was to talk a little bit more about the three scenarios that I put up that for Glacier National Park. These are climate scenarios looking out 50 to 100 years. And I think our primary drivers of uncertainty we were using were the rate of temperature change and the frequency of rain on snow events. And so using those, we came up with these sort of scenarios, and pairing that off with let's see, so we were using scenarios, and the idea is that there's three sort of possible plausible futures there. The climate complacency is the idea of climate change isn't moving so fast. It's a slower rate of change, not so many rain on snow events, but still mixed in there is the normal natural variability that we have in northwest Montana. And I have to say, Northwest Montana is a place that, even without the effects of climate change, has a lot of natural variability built into it. I think a lot of climate data has shown that. So we just get a lot of variation year to year to begin with or without climate change. So that climate change signal is very weak under that scenario. It's not a real obvious change that's coming. Whereas some of these other scenarios, you get some of those changes are a little more significant. The signals are a little bit stronger. And, as Colorado creeps north, is that idea that, we're getting those we got those mixed signals, but there is kind of a trajectory showing that we are getting warmer, we are getting drier, but, you could easily have a winter like this mixed in with dry and warm ones. Whereas, the race of the refuge is kind of that outlier that says, hey, the signals are really, really strong about where things are headed. I would say there are places in Alaska that are sort of in this category where the rate of change is so dramatic, there's no question where things are headed in terms of melting permafrost, warmer, drier summers, lack of snow, melting sea ice, all of those things. So you sort of lay those out as possibilities for Glacier National Park. I've already forgotten the second question. Oh, how much flexibility? The second question was about how much flexibility do we have as an agency. So, needless to say, we are part of the federal government. So, we are dependent on Congress for our budgets. I will say that as the National Park Service, we tend to have attract a lot of bipartisan positive, favor, as it were, because historically, and actually some of our staff would tell you that historically we've actually done better budget-wise under Republican administrations than Democratic administrations. So looking at the data. So, but so we have to live with that, and we have to live within those means, and I think it's, the Joseph Radabau's work with looking at sort of longer term, over 10 years, what the budgets could look like, really sort of gives us an understanding that, there's not going to be a lot of room for expansion. So how do we deal with these new challenges like AIS? How do we deal with new opportunities like working with the Blackfeet to bring back bison? And really it comes back to working with partners to the extent we can, where we can leverage our ability. It also, I think, comes to working with our partners with philanthropy. And sort of coming back around, through the Glacier National Park Conservancy, they do a lot for Glacier in terms of really helping us with what we call that margin of excellence. Things like the Native America Speaks program, things like the Dark Sky programs. Those are all funded and supported by the Glacier National Park Conservancy. And so I think as they look forward, they see their role as really going to increase as time goes on. And, all I can say is I'm thankful for them, because there's a lot we wouldn't be able to do without that kind of support, as well with all the partnerships that we work with in and around the area.
I'll take the microphone so you don't have to repeat the question. I know. My question is in terms of the race to refuge scenario in terms of planning. And this is a bit sciencey, so well, not really. Is there, I would think that there's an elevational gradient within the park that leads to the distribution of these three scenarios even within the park itself, in terms of areas at higher elevation perhaps being true refuge relative to moderate to low elevations. And I'm sort of thinking of Clint Maltfield's work with the stoneflies, these endemic stoneflies that are, I think, at high risk of major problems moving forward with climate change in particular. So within the, can you expand? I'm going to piggyback off of the question there, but there's within the park, don't you think all three of these scenarios are at play as elevation or windward, leeward sides of weather move through the park?
I guess my first comment would be that it's actually, I think what we have to realize is Glacier National Park's only 1 million acres in size, and so when we look at the impacts of climate change, we need to look at a larger landscape, and that's what we do through the Crown Managers Partnership, we work on a landscape that goes all the way from Banff to Missoula, and looking at, such issues as glacier stonefly, which of course is unique to Glacier, but we look at, just a whole range of issues like salmonids, invasive species, drought, and look at what are some of those, what is it looking like on the larger landscape, and what are the varied strategies you can take on the larger landscape. Because there's a lot of thinking that when it comes to climate change, there's so much uncertainty about how that will play out, that thinking you're going to pick one strategy and that's going to be the right one, that's got a lot of people nervous. And so we like to think that you'll pick a range of strategies across a given landscape. And so by working it through a partnership, it could be that wilderness areas are perfect places to take a hands-off strategy, and you might take other areas that are adjacent to urban areas or more developed areas, that you might take a more intrusive or more manipulative strategy. So it's looking at that range of strategies across the landscape rather than thinking that we all take the same strategy. Because when you talk about things like refugia is an interesting one, how hard do we try to keep pika in the park viable, and to what extent are we willing to go, would you build glass domes and put them in glass domes to keep them, alive in a national park? Well, that doesn't fit with a lot of people's notions of what a national park is. So, but, there's the issue of, are you trying to, preserve genetic diversity? That might be a strategy. But if you're trying to retain natural process, that's another strategy. And I think part of these scenarios help feed that idea of, when, for a lot of times, like invasive species, like invasive weeds, knapweed, the work we do to spray, to pull, to do all that is about building resilience into our existing ecosystem, and giving it time to potentially adapt to the change that's coming. But sometimes you run into situations where the change is so dramatic, the ecosystem is changing, thinking that you're going to sort of stop the clock, or you're going to be able to hold off change isn't really going to happen, and you have to sort of give into that and maybe even facilitate change. So there's a lot of debate going on out there about the response to climate change, and there's absolutely the safe bet is to do things that build resilience into your existing systems. But it's we've seen a number of places where that hasn't worked, and things have gone ahead and moved and changed, and should we just go ahead and go with the change? I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it did.
Okay.
I think it did. Thank you.
I've been to the park many times, and to my knowledge, I've never counted. How do you go about your attendance?
So our attendance is built based on a multiplier.
What was the question?
Oh, sorry. Good, thank you. So the question is, it's not obvious when you go into the park that you're counted as a visitor. So how do we come up with the fact that, and there's an article I think in the Missoulian today about that. How do we know that we had exactly 2.9 million visitors, or actually it's even down to the single digits on that? And it's actually based on the multipliers that we collect. We collect a lot of information. And it's really not about being accurate for that year as much as being consistent on how you count over the years. So we have this methodology that uses multipliers for vehicles coming in, uses multipliers for stays in our campgrounds, in our hotels. So that's that methodology that we use over time, because really it's the change over time you're looking at. And we know that the absolute number is there's a lot of squishy there. So luckily at Glacier we don't have to use photos. So.
Jeff, I understand that Canadian parks are free this summer.
Right.
I know that next year, so I don't know.
Well, this year.
This year,
Yes.
2017. And so people could go to Waterton, and if you've never been to Waterton, it's also nice It's part of Glacier. And you can get a Parks Canada pass online for free. And it's good for all Canada parks, for all 2007. Yeah.
Yep, so if you didn't know, entry to all national parks in Canada are free this year, and Parks Canada is actually encouraging people to go online, so you probably can Google it, to get, they actually have these commemorative passes that you can get online, and I think it'll facilitate the process of going through their entrance gates. But terrific opportunity. Again, we try to work as seamlessly as we can with Waterton National Park for our visitors, so they can have that great sort of seamless experience of the International Peace Park.
I'm a cyclist, and one of the great things every spring is riding to Logan Pass before it's open to motor vehicles. I'm wondering what you're doing about the summer use for bicycling opportunities, the possibility of making a fall day in the shoulder season in the fall for bicycles only, and developing other bicycling opportunities up the North Fork or Mini Glacier or something for cyclists.
So the question was about cycling and cycling opportunities, what we have now with the hiker-biker season, as well as once the road is open, what is that bicycling experience like? We've been working on biking, and I've actually been sort of challenged by some in the biking community about the prohibitions we have on biking during the height of the season. So during the height of the busy time, we prohibit bicycles on that lower section going along Lake McDonald Road, going both directions, and then we prohibit cycling going up the Logan Pass during certain hours during the day, during those high use periods. So, and I was actually asked, how did you come up with that prohibition? Well, that prohibition actually came up in the 70s, so it was long before I got here. And really, as I recall, that prohibition was really sort of I guess you'd say a common sense kind of decision at that point, because actually there was a plan that had been put forward to prohibit bicycles altogether on the going to the sun road. So I think they saw it as a balance to accommodate bicycles, but still address that issue of, when it's busy, it becomes difficult for both cyclists and drivers. And but before I sort of do away with that prohibition, because it's the only section of roadway in Montana that has any regulation on it that I understand. Even though I think there was a move to pass legislation prohibiting bicycles on certain roadways statewide, but for now we're the only ones. And before I lift that, I said I really do need to have somebody come in and do the science on this. Give me a traffic study. Look at those issues of road widths, passing vehicles. This last year, we put some road counters out specifically for our biker hiker season, and we got these counters that can distinguish between vehicles and bikers. And so we've learned a lot just in 1 year about the patterns of cycling. We have a lot of cyclists that do go over Logan Pass all through the summer. Most of the time you don't see them because they get up early in the morning to get up there. Now, if you're one of those going early to get a hiking parking spot to go hiking, you probably run into them. But yeah, it's surprising how many bikers we have that go during the height of the season. We've really put our emphasis, and we see the opportunity is to operationalize that biker hiker season. So last year we institutionalized a shuttle system because we know that Avalanche would just get filled up with parking, and we have all those parking issues start playing out. So we've introduced a shuttle system that's got a bike trailer to help facilitate that from Lake McDonald Lodge up to Avalanche. And this year we're going to add to that system so that it actually provides service all the way from Apgar for people to take their bikes up. So we're really trying to operationalize that biker hiker because we think that's the opportunity. We know that there's a lot of families that really like getting out when there are no cars on the road. So we started to look at what we can do in the fall for sort of the reverse, and it's a little bit more of a trick because when the snow flies and it shuts down everything. So, you know, we'd like to look at that over time. As far as new opportunities in the park, we're really pretty limited on that. I think, you know, again, I think we don't see ourselves building new roads, you know, we'll take advantage of if we have roads that have, you know, widths for bike lanes, we will put those in. But we don't see ourselves doing a lot of new construction in the park, primarily because we're trying to balance things like grizzly bear habitat, like, you know, a fairly intact ecosystem, and some of these new developments would just, you know, put some of those resources at risk. Go for it.
Inner North Fork Road going to reopen ever?
So the inside North Fork Road.
Yeah.
So we had to shut down the inside North Fork Road probably 3 years ago now, when Anaconda Creek took it out. And I think it was probably the third, fourth year in a row that Anaconda Creek had flooded and taken the road out. So, you know, and every time we go put the road back in, we're dumping a bunch of gravel back into this whole trout stream. So we were having a conflict there. So we've done some study work, and we've got some alternatives to actually move the road out of that area so it doesn't become a problem. But it's going to take some money for that to happen. So we haven't, you know, we've got projects in seeking those funds to move that road so we can reopen it to traffic. But it's not going to come this year, I can tell you that. So, but it is in our plan to move the road and reopen it to traffic, because we know it provides a visitor experience, you know, that a lot of people like to do, is do the loop up to Fullbridge.
Good biking too. So to help take the pressure off going to the Sun Corridor, have you thought about expanding the season? Because I grew up in the valley below Yellowstone Park. The Beartooth Highway is open about a month or more earlier than to go into the sun. In fact, they're already clearing the roads up in Yellowstone as we speak. Have you thought about opening the roads earlier to expand the season?
Well,
there's less congestion.
Yeah, yeah, that's a two-edged sword on that one. You know, it's I think, you know, I haven't studied. I haven't been over Beartooth enough to know how it was designed. But one of the things I learned early on when I came to Glacier is when you look at that going to Sun Road, it was not designed by road engineers. Because a road engineer would have just done a bunch of zigzags going straight up to the pass. Landscape architects said, no, we can make this incredibly scenic if we just make this long switchback and cross 40 avalanche paths along the way. And it's those avalanche paths that are the problem. Because we found that if we plow too early, they'll just come down on top of it. And we actually put our own, you know, staff in danger. So when we plow that, we'll start April 4th is when we start plowing it. And if all goes well, we'll get it plowed before July 1st. I can't say exactly when, but yeah, you know, that yeah, the opportunities for us to open that road early, you know, and then we have the big drift that's on the east side of the pass that, you know, oftentimes is 90 feet deep, you know, and so you can't get into those things too early. And quite honestly, it's best to let nature melt those things out more than try to force nature to melt those things out.
The only comment I have is that you might take some lessons learned from the Beartooth, because they're very similar in design. They have switchbacks, they have avalanches, they're almost identical when you look at them from a topographical point of view, and their elevation is higher than going to the sun.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, I know my predecessors have, you know, been pushed in that direction as well. And so, you know, and from what I've heard, you know, it doesn't make sense on our end. So I can't explain it, you know, exactly why that is. But, you know, I would also say, you know, more and more, I feel that there's less pressure in me because, you know, I think a lot of my predecessors always used to say that people in the valley would always say, well, the park isn't open until the pass is open. And that, well, I have to say in the 4 years I've been here, I don't hear that quite as much. And I think part of it is because this biker hiker season, you know, why is our use in May going up 50% in 2 years? I mean, the park's not very closed if it is closed. You know, people are discovering that there are other opportunities to be enjoyed there. It's a very different opportunity than driving up to Logan Pass, but it's still a bona fide opportunity that people are coming for.
I'll just make a comment. I'm guessing that on the weekend before the road opens to motor vehicles, there are as many bicycles as there are in late July and cars.
That could be. I mean, I think the question or the comment was, you know, the number of bicycles that are on the Going to the Sun Road just before the Logan Pass opens. And we know that on our busiest days, we'll have 5,000 bicycles going up the road. So that's what our numbers have shown.
I've spoken to people who were in the park in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and have been told that the vistas of Lake McDonald between Apgar and the lodge were wide open, and now the trees have grown up. Has there ever been any talk of removing the trees in some sections to open those back up, or would that have too much impact on what?
No, our plan actually calls for vista clearing periodically, and we will be doing vista clearing this year.
Oh.
So it's been a few years. I think the last time they did vista clearing was the last time they put that 2-inch layer on the road. I don't know, Diane, if you remember when that was, but you know, it's one of the earlier phases of the Going to the Sun rehabilitation. But we do see that, but it's not something we can do every year. But you know, we've all said it's time to do it. So
Great, thank you.
we got some funding for that.
Yeah, Jeff. Gary Nolan, I've worked for you for years. I know there's a lot of construction going on Highway 2 this year. Are they moving the rehabilitation process back to the west side? Is that going to create a lot of bottlenecks, or that's kind of my question for this year?
Well, you know, it's you know, we didn't know about all the construction in Columbia Falls. You know, we knew the Bad Rock Canyon was coming, and we knew we were going to have our own construction. So, you know, I don't know what that's going to be, quite honestly. You know, it's sort of like when you add it all up, it seems like, okay, there could be quite a big congestion. But, you know, one of the things that we learned last summer was that, the last summer was maybe the second summer where we didn't have active construction on the road. Maybe the first summer we didn't have any active construction going on the road all during the height of the busy season. And the folks up at Logan Pass, you know, it was just relentless, the number of cars that were coming in. Never stopped, never stopped, never stopped. Late in the season, we had a contractor come up and start reconstructing some of those walls that had been taken out by avalanches. And again, you know, what we know that if we plow too early, the avalanches will take out the walls. It's better to let the avalanches all run up high and then just go over the tops of it. So we put in a stoplight just above Big Bend, between below Rimrock, and right away our staff up at Logan Pass noticed that the pacing that light provided to the Logan Pass parking lots, that it would sort of, you know, be a lot of incoming, then it would slow down, relax a little bit, people would find their places, then it would come, you know, fill up again. So there was a kind of a pacing that occurred with that was actually, they thought was very positive to reducing some of the issues of when it's just a constant incoming flow. So, and that made me think about, there's a lot of places in the world where they deal with traffic, and we should really sort of be thinking more about that. Yellowstone, for example, they're bringing in the Michelin group, who are bringing their social scientists, their traffic engineers, to look at their canyon area, which is an area that's notorious for gridlock. And what can they be doing? Is it going to be circles? Is it going to be traffic lights? I don't know, but sort of. How can they sort of break that up so it just doesn't sort of get into that gnarly gridlock?
I'm just curious if they're moving the rehabilitation over to the phase 10 there between Apgar and Avalanche, if they're going to redo that this year, or if the...
Yes, yeah. That final phase is going to be taking place this year, and I think as much work is supposed to be done in the shoulder season to minimize its impact on the height of the visitor centers.
Okay.
These questions
Anyway.
are rambunctious.
Do you need to end this at some time, or are we? Okay.
You got,
Do we have any questions from the barrel room? I don't know if this.
I'll go over and check for you.
Okay.
You got about 15 more minutes.
Okay.
Can you handle that?
Yeah.
A while back, there were articles in the newspaper, local newspaper, about options to figure out the traffic congestion, including restricting even access into the park or public transportation only. Being a local for almost 40 years, I like to jump in my car and just go up there. But I don't want to face a roadblock when I go. I want to be able to get into the park and enjoy it. Are there still options on the table for restricting?
There are options on the table for discussion. So nothing, we won't be implementing anything anytime soon, at least not for
My lifetime.
a long time. So yeah, those plans are, but when, you know, I will say that if we get into those acute situations, some of those near to gridlock situations that we actually found ourselves in last summer, you may find that the gate gets swung and you may be asked to wait your turn until somebody comes out, or, you know, if it's one of those situations. Usually it's in those one-way, one-out places. Going to the Sun Road, being a through road, you know, oftentimes when Logan Pass fills up or gets to the point of gridlock, the parking lot, our staff just waives traffic pass, so they don't even have the option of turning in to look for a parking spot. So, but you know, there's other places to stop, other places to go on that road. But it's those one-way in, one-way out places that I think you may actually see a gate closed, or you may stop for a few minutes till somebody else comes out.
Thank you.
Seeing the data that shows the increased visitors throughout not just Glacier, but many of our parks, and understanding the budget pressures that you've been able to work with, is there any thought or consideration on how to, is there any balance we can do to increase our budget for the national parks based on visitor usage, or what's your
Well, I think, you know, as a service, the Park Service is a little bit hesitant. Actually, you can go online and see the Park Service Green Book, and when you go look at the Park Service Green Book, you will see that the parks budget, and right next to the column of the parks budget will be the parks visitation. And Congress will look at that, but they are hesitant to think that every, you know, I always think of the Park Service as a real mashup of experiences, opportunities, and stories. It's not, we're not all the same, we don't tell the same story, and our experiences are different. So I think, you know, to think that, you know, I think parks are given more weight given their visitation for funding, but that, you know, to just sort of go by a strict formula that would sort of allocate funding along visitation, I'm a little bit worried about that, because a lot of our units in Alaska, you know, would, for example, you know, their funding might be changed drastically. And, you know, some of them, you know, as a mashup of all these units doing different things, you know, some of the most incredible wilderness, some of the most intact ecosystems are in those places, and you can't just, you know, sort of take a hands off and let all comers come to those kinds of places. So I think, you know, it's a balance.
All right, we'll call the last question of the night. Last question. Oh, you guys can make a Lakers donation.
Yeah.
I hear $5.
I don't mind sticking around afterwards.
$12. We're up to 12.
Good question. You've been very proactive on two issues that are very important to the quality of water in the lake. One is the oil trade issue, and the other is mussels. Now, you mentioned avalanches, and my understanding there have been a substantial number of avalanches in the last month or two that have affected the rail line, and I'm wondering to what extent that's led to further discussion with BNSF about additional snow sheds. Question number one. Question number two is you've been a leader in terms of addressing the mussel issue in terms of the state of Montana. Has the state learned anything from you, and do you see that learning reflected in the actions recently taken in the legislature?
So two questions, what about mussels and what about oil on trains? So maybe I'll go mussels first, since I think it might be the easiest. In terms of, you know, in discussing about how we're going to move forward on this managing AIS across the state and what we're doing, I think what you will see is that Glacier is going to be a little bit more conservative about reducing the threat of quagga and zebra mussels coming into the park. And a lot of reason why the state says it's, you know, we talk and they're encouraging because, you know, they understand Glacier has a lot of control points. You know, we have places where we can stop the traffic, we see the boat, we can ask them for inspection or, you know, ask them, you know, give them the, ask them where they've been, where they came from, where's the boat been, all those kinds of things. I think the state is challenged quite a bit because the state's so damn big. There's so many entry points into it that, you know, sort of, yeah, how do you sort of apply a network of inspection stations to such a broad landscape? It's very challenging. You know, I've been working with the state to help them try to secure, you know, the federal match they need to implement their program. You know, we're hoping that we'll all be beneficiaries of, you know, some of the interests that Oregon, Washington, Idaho all have on making sure that we keep it out of the Columbia River Basin. So, so I think that's my answer for you on the first one. Second question about oil on trains. So yes, this was the second winter where we issued a permit to BNSF to do avalanche control inside the park for those avalanches that sort of run out of the park over their snow sheds and around the ends of their snow sheds. And and we've only issued those permits twice. I've done it both times. Both times they've been sort of at times that I would consider sort of historic in nature. You know, first one was when we had those avalanches, same time as that avalanche in Missoula. I mean, that was a pretty remarkable situation. The Avalanche Center said, yeah, this is very unusual to see that loading on two directions and on about that. And likewise, I think, you know, this year when we saw that, you know, 72-inch snowfall in St. Mary, that's kind of a little on the unusual side. You know, and you know, they have to meet a certain threshold before we give them that permission, and that has to be, you know, trains have been not moving and they've been waiting for the snowpack to settle, and if it still looks like it still presents a threat, then we give it. So we set a pretty significant bar for them. They don't just get to go out there and do avalanche control in the park anytime they want. But it certainly does give us that opportunity to open up the conversation about extending the snow sheds that they have there. And so that's not, I can't say it happens every time we issue a permit. You know, we follow up with, you know, hey, when are you going to extend the snow sheds? You know, that's an ongoing conversation with them. You know, we've been working with BNSF a lot with this oil on trains issue. You know, in that sort of collaborative sense, they've been working with us to ensure that even you know, no matter how much prevention work you do, which we are really pushing them to do as much prevention work as they can to prevent an incident from ever happening, you always also have to be prepared for a response. And you know, part of my background working in Alaska, working in some of the parks that were most affected by the Exxon Valdez oil spill, I kind of have a sense of a lot of those communities there are very proactive about never letting something like that happen again. And so learning what some of those lessons are in terms of how do we sort of be prepared in the event of that. So BNSF has been very good in working with them, helping to fund a lot of those sort of response-related activities. But you know, we will continue to work with them, and usually some of that work involves working through our delegation on the prevention side of things as well. So, and with that,
Thank you.
I would offer we should continue this round of applause. That was incredible. Thank you very much. I'm sure after that round of questioning, that water tastes delicious. So before everybody gets up, I want to say one thing in closing. There's we have in the Flathead Valley and within the area here a major threat in terms of invasive mussels, and I continue to urge you to be proactive with your government agencies and with anybody that cares to listen, and even if they don't care to listen, to talk about how dangerous this threat is to Flathead Lake, to the Flathead River, to the Columbia River, and to the Pacific Northwest as a whole. And in that light, I think I'd like to mention that there's local communities that are seeking people who want to volunteer to learn how to inspect boats and inspect and help monitor the potential vector that is as people moving mussels into this area. And I urge you to go to the Swan Lakers website. They're actively seeking inspections. I'm sure that there's information about how to become a boat inspector at the Flathead Lakers website. It's really critical that we have a movement in mass moving forward, especially as we move into our busy season here in the Valley. So again, as a representative of the biostation and Science on Tap, I urge you to do everything you can to do the best job of preventing mussels from getting here. And the number one way to do that is to stop infected boats. So I will close with that again. A last round of thanks for Jeff Mount. What a great presentation. Thank you very much for coming. Have a great night.